She wants all of the privileges that go along with an identity, but she doesn't want any of the responsibility. She doesn't want to do any of the work. She wants the tiara. She doesn't want the public service.
Dangerous than anybody there. She's just underrated and plays a dumb ginger card. I don't know what I'm doing. But Fergie, you better watch out for Fergie.
And she also is pretending like she's crying. We zoomed in just to see. There isn't a tear in sight. Dan, look at this. I invite the viewers to take a close-up look at this. Where's the tear?
It's 4:30 a.m. in London, December 23rd, 2025. In the early hours of the morning, Buckingham Palace issued confirmation of what senior officials described as a necessary and irreversible clarification of limits. The announcement followed an unusually direct and firmly worded statement authorized by Prince William, responding to a series of public attacks made by Prince Harry against both King Charles III and Catherine, Princess of Wales. While the palace statement did not mention Meghan Markle by name in its opening lines, it framed the issue squarely as one of institutional protection rather than familial dispute. The message, however, was unmistakable. The period during which public attacks on the monarchy, particularly those amplified through commercial media platforms, were tolerated had come to an end. There comes a moment, the statement read, when silence no longer represents restraint, but abdication. That moment has now passed. This marked the first time Prince William had authorized language of such directness and finality. For years, he had deliberately remained distant from the media cycle surrounding the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, refusing to engage publicly even when narratives targeted his wife, questioned his leadership, or challenged the moral authority of the crown. That restraint ended following Prince Harry's most recent remarks, in which he accused King Charles of emotional neglect, alleged institutional cruelty toward Meghan, and directly criticized Catherine for not intervening publicly during the 2021 controversy surrounding Meghan's integration into royal life. According to palace officials, the decision to respond was not driven by emotion, but by procedure. Although Harry's December comments served as the immediate trigger, insiders stressed that the response itself had been prepared long in advance. Since 2021, palace staff had quietly monitored the cumulative effect of repeated Sussex-linked media ventures, television series, interviews, podcasts, and associated commentary that increasingly reframed private family disagreements as systemic moral failures of the monarchy. Initially, these appearances were tolerated. Palace advisors believed public interest would eventually diminish and that restraint would safeguard long-term institutional credibility. Over time, however, the tone shifted dramatically. What began as reflective commentary about royal life gradually evolved into claims of structural victimization, allegations of racial bias, and, most damaging of all, personal accusations directed at senior working royals who were bound by convention from responding. Harry's latest intervention crossed a critical threshold. By publicly portraying Catherine as complicit, or worse, calculating, in Meghan's alleged mistreatment, he transformed the dispute from narrative disagreement into reputational damage. Palace aides say this shift left Prince William with no choice but to act. William's response was deliberately structured in three parts. First, it reaffirmed the palace's established position regarding 2021. That concerns raised internally at the time were addressed through proper channels, and that no senior royal acted with malice or prejudice. Without naming Meghan, the statement rejected the idea that public silence equated to moral failure. Second, the statement addressed Harry directly, again without naming him, asserting that private family matters had repeatedly been converted into public accusations for commercial amplification. The phrase instrumentalization of grievance appeared once, carefully placed. Third, and most consequentially, Prince William drew a firm boundary. No individual, regardless of title acquired by birth or marriage, would be permitted to monetize association with the crown while simultaneously undermining its legitimacy. Sources confirmed this language was coordinated with King Charles and senior constitutional advisors. The king did not issue a separate statement. Palace officials described his stance as supportive yet measured. While personally wounded by Harry's language, Charles was determined to avoid public escalation. His role was to authorize William's authority to speak as future monarch and steward of institutional continuity. Privately, aides confirmed that the king agreed the line needed to be drawn, not against his son personally, but against a pattern of conduct that risked normalizing public attacks on the monarchy as entertainment. Notably, Catherine offered no comment, no background briefing, no anonymous rebuttal. According to those close to her, this was intentional. Since 2021, her position has been consistent. The monarchy does not defend itself through personal counternarratives. Her silence is not avoidance, it is doctrine. As one senior aide put it, she would not trade dignity for temporary vindication, nor allow the institution to be pulled into a personality contest. That silence, however, should not be mistaken for passivity. Palace records confirm Catherine has been deeply involved in internal reviews of staff welfare, media protocol, and the boundaries between private life and public duty since the Sussex departure. Her influence is administrative, not performative. By the end of December 23, the palace had achieved its objective, clarity. There would be no rolling rebuttals, no tit-for-tat exchanges. William had spoken once, firmly, and the institution would now proceed on that basis. Whether Harry accepts that boundary remains uncertain. What is no longer in doubt is that the future king has chosen to defend both his family and the crown, even at the cost of a permanent fracture. Behind the public language of loyalty and love, palace officials perceive a more complex dynamic shaping Harry's alignment with Meghan, one driven as much by commercial logic as personal conviction. This distinction matters because it explains why William now views the situation not as a family dispute, but as an institutional challenge. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in 2020, the palace anticipated a finite adjustment period. What followed instead was the construction of an expanding media ecosystem built around proximity to royalty. Early projects framed the departure as liberation. Later productions reframed it as survival. By 2021, the narrative had shifted decisively toward grievance, exclusion, and moral injury, delivered at scale. Internal assessments identified a pattern. Releases were timed for maximum global impact. Allegations intensified when public attention waned. Personal memories were recontextualized as systemic indictments. Advisors concluded the objective was no longer reconciliation, but relevance. Harry's vulnerability became leverage. His well-documented sensitivity to childhood scrutiny, including persistent speculation about his appearance and the humiliating requirement to undergo DNA testing during his youth, was reframed publicly as evidence of lifelong marginalization. Meghan described this as shared trauma, a bond forged through mutual misunderstanding and exile. Within the palace, the interpretation was far less sympathetic. Aides argue Harry's pain was genuine but selectively curated. Omitted, they note, was King Charles's sustained effort to protect, include, and support Harry well into adulthood. By reframing these experiences as institutional cruelty, the Sussex narrative converted personal history into marketable content. For William, this crossed a moral line. Unlike Meghan, Harry does not come from the entertainment industry. He does not instinctively operate by its rules. Insiders say he underestimated the constraints imposed by major platforms, particularly Netflix, where continued visibility depends on escalation. Calm reflection does not trend, controversy does. From 2021 onward, several Sussex-linked ventures underperformed or faced monetization challenges. Yet association with the royal brand continued to sustain attention. Standing near the crown's shadow proved valuable in itself. William's concern extended beyond reputation. It was about precedent. If grievance could be endlessly monetized without consequence, silence would become complicity. Harry's public criticism of Catherine was viewed internally as both unfair and revealing. Catherine had adhered strictly to protocol in 2021 by refusing to litigate personal matters through the press. That decision, now reframed by Harry as moral failure, was, in palace terms, institutional loyalty. Those close to William say this accusation was decisive. Catherine had absorbed years of insinuation and pressure without response. To portray her as calculating while elevating Meghan as uniquely injured was, in William's view, a distortion that required correction. William's calculation is stark. A monarchy cannot coexist with a parallel commercial narrative that profits from portraying it as abusive. One system depends on continuity and trust, the other on disruption and attention. They're incompatible. By responding when he did, William sought to end ambiguity. Harry's choice to publicly align with Meghan against the crown carries consequences, not emotional retaliation, but structural separation. The palace does not seek Harry's humiliation, it seeks insulation. In the days leading up to the statement, Buckingham Palace was not in crisis mode, but review mode. Legal, constitutional, and reputational assessments focused on a single question: when does restraint cease to serve the crown? Advisors unanimously concluded that the Sussex narrative had crossed from criticism into damage. King Charles privately articulated 3 non-negotiable lines. First, the crown would not be portrayed as racially or institutionally abusive without consequence. Second, senior working royals, particularly Catherine, would not be left exposed to character assassination. Third, royal proximity would not be commercialized without accountability. These principles demanded clarity, not retaliation. Catherine's role in these deliberations was quiet but decisive. Since 2021, she has consistently declined media approaches seeking balance or access. Her reasoning is simple: once a royal monetizes narrative, the institution becomes content, and content must escalate to survive. That logic, she believes, is incompatible with monarchy. This principle now underpins what officials call the palace's post-2021 media doctrine. The crown does not compete in the attention economy. It outlasts it. William's statement was therefore not entertainment rebuttal, but boundary setting. Timing was critical. Palace polling suggested growing normalization of the idea that royal legitimacy was subject to personal testimony rather than constitutional function. That drift, advisors warned, had to be arrested. William understood the personal cost. Speaking now would harden the divide with his brother. Remaining silent would erode the authority he is meant to inherit. As one aide put it, he chose the crown knowing it might cost him Harry. By the evening of December 23rd, the palace spoke once and disengaged. The hours that followed demonstrated how precisely the move was calibrated. Harry's reaction was conflicted rather than explosive. He privately sought reassurance that further action would not follow. The response was consistent. The line drawn would stand. Meghan's team moved quickly to frame hurt and disappointment, avoiding direct escalation. Behind the scenes, retaliation options were explored: podcasts, interviews, essays, but each failed the viability test. The palace's silence removed the oxygen needed for sustained confrontation. Catherine's schedule continued unchanged. Duty remained visible. Charles remained silent. By December 24th, no public clash had materialized. William's strategy had worked. The monarchy did not chase narrative, it set terms. What followed was not a battle, but recalibration. Internally, aides referred to the moment as the end of elasticity. The Sussex exception, the gray zone of royal association without accountability, had closed. The implications are structural. Legitimacy flows from continuity, not argument. Silence paired with duty carries authority. For Harry, options are now constrained. Reconciliation is not closed, but conditional: disengagement from the commercialization of grievance. For Catherine, restraint has become policy. For Charles, authority has been delegated. For William, leadership has been asserted. The cost is human. The outcome is institutional. December 23, 2025, will be remembered not for what the palace said, but for what it refused to become: a participant in its own commodification. The line has been drawn. And in drawing it, the crown has begun quietly to rebuild.